everybody. Welcome to the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. Sadly, that was Highland Park, Illinois, on the 4th of July parade. Another mass shooting. I think it was 6 or 7 people died in that one. I don't know what's happening in this country, folks. I just think we've become a bloodthirsty nation of savages, one shooting after another. But the interesting thing is when you listen to that clip, as horrifying as it sounds, there's that pause between the gunshots. And you know what that pause is? That's this maniac reloading another high-capacity clip. The same high-capacity magazine clips that Republicans refuse to ban. Now, just imagine if we didn't have high-capacity magazine clips. Imagine if we didn't have AR-15s. That clip would sound a lot different. There'd probably be 1 gunshot or 2 gunshots or maybe 6 gunshots. And a lot less people would be dead, not just in that shooting, but in every other shooting. These are weapons of war. They're not needed. They're not needed for the average American. If you want to shoot a freaking groundhog, you can do that. You don't need an AR-15. Let me go to that McConnell clip.
I think yesterday's shooting is another example of what the problem is. The problem is mental health and these young men who seem to be inspired to commit these atrocities. So I think the bill that we passed targeted the problem. In that particular instance, it was school safety and mental health. We have got to figure out some way to identify these troubled young men, and it's very complicated.
I'm sorry, Turtle Man, it's not mental health, okay? It's not mental health, it's not pot, it's not porn, it's not video games, it's not violent TV shows. You know what's responsible for gun violence, Mr. McConnell? Guns. That's what's responsible for gun violence. And until we focus on banning these weapons and banning these munitions and increasing the age limits across the board and expanding background checks and holding people and families responsible and holding gun manufacturers responsible, we're going to see week after week after week of mass shootings. And if, history is any indication of what lies ahead, there's probably going to be another shooting in a week from now or less. And where's that one going to be? Now that school's out, is that going to be at a camp? Are little kids in camp going to die now? Or is it going to be another movie theater or a mall or a sporting event or a house of worship? This shit has to stop. And the more these people in Congress focus on pot and porn and video games and TV shows and all kinds of bullshit, nothing's going to change. I know we just passed a historic piece of legislation recently, but it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't go far at all. It's something, and I'm glad we have it because something is better than nothing. But it's not going to stop a maniac like this guy who waltzed into a building and went up to a roof and fired 72 shots into a bunch of people celebrating our nation's independence. You can't even go to a parade anymore. So that's what Mitch McConnell and his pals in the Republican Party should focus on. Guns. Let's get rid of the guns. The other subject I want to briefly touch upon before we bring on our guests is the January 6th committee hearings, which they're really starting to, I think, move the needle. This week, Pat Cipollone, who is Trump's former White House counsel, he's been subpoenaed. He's going to try to get out of it by claiming executive privilege and all sorts of nonsense, but that's not going to work. And could he be the John Dean of Trumpgate, of the big lie gate? Who knows? John Dean, of course, was the White House counsel for Nixon, who really ended up being the chief prosecution witness and brought the whole house of cards down. So that'll be interesting to see whether a deal is cut with Cipollone and he subpoenas in a deal, or whether he's a hostile witness and there is no, give and take. I'm sure they'll agree to some stuff to bring him in, but the importance of his testimony on the heels of Cassidy Hutchison's testimony. She was the assistant to Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is going to be critical because he's going to be able to confirm everything she said, from Trump knowing about the weapons that were that he wanted allowed in, from that to the craziness that went on in the limo, with Trump grabbing the wheel and Trump grabbing his Secret Service agent by the neck, to Mark Meadows being completely indifferent to the fact that thousands of people were storming into the Capitol. So his testimony is going to be key. And also it's key because it's just one step closer now to Mar-a-Lago. The next hearing is scheduled for this coming Tuesday, July 12th. The focus is going to be on the lead up to J6, specifically the white nationalist groups like Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters. Don't really understand the name Three Percenters, Maddie. Maybe I missed the memo on that, but it's like, if you're like, you want to preserve like shouldn't you be like the 99 percenters or the 98 percenters? Like, you're really not thinking very highly of yourself, right?
Math is not there.
Right, not their strong suit. Yeah. So that's going to be real interesting. I don't know about you guys, but I've been riveted to those hearings. Adam Schiff, who's on the committee, said the next couple of hearings, quote, will cover the run-up to January 6th, the marshaling of this mob that appeared on the mall that day, and the attack on the Capitol. So the most important thing, though, is it moving the needle with Republicans? I think it has on some very, very small level, but listen to what Liz Cheney had to say recently.
Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
Amen, sister. That's the main thing. Years from now, when Trump is either in jail or he's just like an old buffoon golfing in Florida and doing his Rocky Graziano routine like Robert De Niro in the movie Raging Bull, where he's just like walking around telling jokes with a big fat belly. Years from now, these Republicans, many of them are young. They're going to be, they have to live with themselves. I don't think most of them actually give a shit about what they see when they look in the mirror, but they have families, they have kids, they have grandkids, and they have legacies. And as Congresswoman Cheney said, that's what they should be focusing on, because they're trading in their legacies for Donald Trump to protect and defend Donald Trump. And that's just, I don't understand why, because he returns no loyalty whatsoever. The thing that is exciting me lately is that I do think Trump is going to be held accountable. I do think that the J6 committee is making great progress. I do think that Merrick Garland at the Justice Department is getting more and more pressure through these hearings to ultimately indict. But the thing I'm excited the most about is Georgia. This is where the district attorney has a grand jury, and they just recently subpoenaed Rudy Giuliani and a few others in his legal team. And they're going after him specifically for that call that he made to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, where he is basically admitting that he lost the election, but if you just give me one more vote, I win. See how that works? That's illegal. That's election tampering with an election. That's election fraud. That is something that could put his ass in jail. So we're going to watch that real closely. Let's go to Kinsner.
Wrath of the Lord God Almighty come upon you, your health, your family, your home, your livelihood. And I pray, if it be God's will, that you suffer.
You cock-sucking little bastard. We're going to get you. We know where you live. We're coming to your house. Going to get you, Mike. You little cock-sucking bastard.
These are messages. What you just heard are just a microscopic sampling of the messages left on the office voicemail of Representative Adam Kinzinger, who, if you don't know, is not just on the J6 committee, but with Liz Cheney is one of the two Republicans. And I say this with absolute reverence, one of the two Republicans who are standing up for democracy. And it is an absolute travesty. It's shocking and disgusting that people in the name of God would be calling him up and saying these things and threatening him and threatening his family. But what's most shocking, you think about Adam Kinzinger. The guy was Air Force Special Ops running combat missions to defend and protect his country. And they're leaving messages on his phone, these kind of vile, threatening, dangerous messages out of sycophantic fealty to Donald Trump, a guy who never suited up for anything, who had 5 deferments for Vietnam, who has no loyalty to anyone or his country. This is who they're attacking, a decorated war vet? It's truly unbelievable. And you know why they do it? Because it's a cult. This is not a constituency. When I hear the word like constituency as it relates to Trump, I get enraged because I'm part of a constituency. You know what I'll do every 4 years? I'll throw a bumper sticker maybe on my car if I don't feel like, if it doesn't bother me to slop up my car, okay? Or I'll wear a button, okay? That's it. I'm not in a cult. These people are in a cult. They are brainwashed. And that's going to bring us to our first guest. We're going to talk a little bit more about cults because Spencer Schneider is not just a New York City-based attorney. He is someone who just wrote a book, which has just been published. It's just been released. You can get it on Amazon and bookstores everywhere. He just wrote a book called Manhattan Cult Story because Spencer was in a secret Manhattan cult for 23 years. Welcome into the back room, Spencer.
Nice to be here, Andy.
For the audience, I just want to say I've known Spencer 40 years, around 40 years. And about 6 years ago, we were walking in Lower Manhattan, and he stopped and looked at me and said, "Did I ever tell you I was in a cult?" And I think maybe my reaction was, no, I think I would have remembered that. And Spencer proceeded to tell me this incredible story. I'm not a person that's shocked very easily, and I was shocked. I was stunned. I was riveted. I was horrified. I had a range of emotions because of the content that he was sharing with me about what had happened to him over a 23-year period, where basically, essentially, and he's going to talk about this, almost every aspect of his life was controlled by the cult leader. Now, this didn't take place in some commune out in Simi Valley, California in the 70s. This was like 1990s Manhattan. And so Spencer's going to share how he got it. Spencer, how did you tell us where were you at a point in your life that you were susceptible to being recruited, and explain the recruitment process a little.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me, Andy. I'm happy to be here. And I remember that moment very well when I told you, and we'll talk more about that in a second because, I'm telling my story really because you encouraged it so much and you felt it was worthy. So I'm grateful to you for that. But let me answer your question. I was 29. I was, and still am, an attorney. I was working at a pretty big firm. My background is, I'm a nice Jewish guy from Long Island, basically. I grew up in a middle-class family in an affluent area. I had loving parents, loving friends. I had success. I went to great schools. I, got got a great job. I didn't really. I mean, I don't fit the profile, I guess, of a cult member. But it turned out that I joined one, and that's what happened. So to answer your question specifically, I was just, working hard, 60 hours a week as a lawyer, and an acquaintance told me about this group, and I immediately told him, no, I'm not interested in joining a cult, because it sounded like a cult to me. Do you want me to keep going here?
Yeah, tell the story.
Okay. I just did an interview on a television interview, and you could say 3 sentences and they're like, yes, that's enough. Thank you very fucking much. It's like, I could just talk all week, Andy.
No, we want the full Monty here.
So to answer your question about how I was recruited, a guy who I know, I call him an acquaintance. I didn't really know him that well. Seemed to be pursuing me for a couple of weeks. He wanted to meet, and he was very persistent.
And what year was this specifically?
1989. I was 29.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I said this part before, but I think I already did say this part. He I'm losing track. But basically what happened was, he was pursuing me. He was very persistent about meeting. I had no idea why. And we got together, and he said, I have a secret to tell you, and which is that I'm a member of an esoteric school. It's helped me in my life, and it meets 2 nights a week, and we study the philosophy of Gerchep and Ouspensky, these Russian mystics who I never heard of before.
See, this would be the moment where, I would be like Roadrunner, bing, you'd see the dust, I would already be home. What made you go, oh, this sounds intriguing. I shall pursue this with this man who just came up to me in a strange place.
Yeah. So it was that was exactly my impulse, and that's exactly what I said. I said, I'm not interested in your cult. I really have no interest in it, and I left. Now, the second I got home, unlike you, I have feelings of guilt and remorse sometimes in my life, and I felt immediately guilty and remorseful for hurting his feelings, because he said this thing was very important for him and he loved it and meant a lot to him. I said, okay,
that's
Ruth.
actually the comedic angle of this whole story is that what you're basically saying is I gave up 23 years of my life because I felt guilty for the cult guy. That's pretty much it.
Totally it. That's what got me through the door. I mean, it was pure guilt.
Wow.
And it's an interesting concept because really, they manipulate you on every aspect possible. I don't think it was intentionally knew that he would, get me in because of guilt, but that was enough to get me to go to a meeting.
So you went on a second date,
we went on
which was an actual meeting.
Right. And so he asked me to meet him. He didn't tell me where we were going. He told me to meet him on the corner of Broadway and Canal Street on a summer night at 7 o'clock, and we walked down the street to a loft on Franklin and Broadway, and it was a desolate part of the city at that time, really desolate. And he took me up to a loft space, and there were about 60 people who were milling about, and there were a bunch of white people like me, basically, in suits and ties, and had just come from Goldman Sachs and law firms, and there were lawyers and bankers and people like me. I was relieved.
So at that point, you didn't say to yourself, this smells like a cult. None of that entered your brain. You thought you are hanging out with smart people who are into self-help, and you're going to make new friends, and you're going to help your career. It was all good.
That's right. Once I walked through that door, I didn't see anybody chanting, and I didn't see any animal sacrifices, and it was normal-looking people. I said, fine, I'll come.
But can I ask you a question? It sounds like even if you had seen an animal sacrifice, you might have stayed.
Well, I would have felt guilty.
I guess it depends on the animal. Right? If it was a squirrel, you'd be like, all right, I'll stay. If it was like a dog, you'd be like, hey, I'm out of here.
Well, if it was like a chicken or something like that, I suppose we could have had dinner. But
that would have been weird.
That would have been weird. But it was nothing like, again, there were people like me and you. I mean, except for the fact that you have no feelings of guilt or whatever. You could have been there.
It's not true. I'm in the tribe. I'm a Jew. That means I'm loaded with guilt.
It's funny because I think I told you this, if you don't mind me jumping up. I did years later, when it came for me to do recruiting, you were on a short list of people to recruit.
No, you would have failed miserably.
And when I asked, we were supposed to make a list of people to meet and run them by like the leaders. And when I gave them your bio, they were like, he doesn't sound good. I said, he's very.
Oh, see, now I'm starting to get insecure. Like, why wasn't I good enough for the cult? Why didn't they want me, Spencer? Why didn't they want me?
Well, I think you checked a lot of the boxes. You made enough money. You're intelligent. But I think I convinced him. I said, they like, what's bad qualities about him? I said, I don't know. Maybe he's cynical. Maybe I said he won't. I don't know if he'll really, believe all this stuff. And frankly, I don't think he's unhappy. I mean, you weren't unhappy.
89? No.
No, 91, 92.
That's when unhappiness kind of started to filter in.
Maybe I should have tried.
If you guys caught me like 94 even, I would have, in my like gangster rap phase, that might have been a good time to penetrate the brain. So you got in.
Right.
Share with us, like, if there's 3 of the craziest moments that you can remember in your 23 years. I've read your book, and so I have my own, like, but I want to hear from you, like, if you can define 3 crazy moments where, even brainwashed, you said to yourself, wait a second, something ain't right here.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, there was nothing crazy the first year, but it's kind of like this analogy that people say. It's kind of like, you put a frog in warm water and then you turn up the water until it's boiling, and they won't leave because they're kind of used to it, which I've never done that with a frog, so I don't know.
I was just going to say to you, I've never done anything sadistic to a frog or any other animal for that matter, so I'm not sure where you're going with this analogy. but I'm curious. I'm definitely curious. Was it like frog boiling night at the cult? Like Tuesdays at the cult. We're going to boil some frogs. Can we
rename? I think you should rename this one as this episode is on animal cruelty. What we did is the bottom line is you slowly get used to a very bad situation, and they turn up the heat throughout. And so none of these crazy things happen in the beginning. They happen later on once I was really caught. I would say the single craziest thing that I saw was the leader, whose name was Sharon Gans, tell a woman that a woman came into the group, and people would come into class, as it was called, and talk about their private lives and personal problems and whatnot. And this woman came in and she was complaining about her husband, and she wasn't happy and this and that, and they weren't having sex, and, like any marriage. And so she... I'm glad you got that one. And then she said, Sharon looked at her and said, Carol, you need to get laid.
Before you continue, I want to just paint the right picture for the audience. Sharon, you got to imagine like the old actress Shelley Winters in her final years, okay? If you can remember like Poseidon Adventure Shelley Winters, okay? Sitting on a throne in the front of a loft in Tribeca with like at a wedding or a funeral, like 2 rows of sections of seats with an aisle down the middle with like maybe 6, 7, 8 seats in each row, maybe 20 rows or whatever. And she's sitting up there literally in a throne. Go ahead, continue.
That's exactly it. And she stood up and she's reclined in her recliner. I mean, she's in a lazy boy pontificating, and people are serving her drinks and whatnot. And she said, "Okay, Carol, you need to get laid." And Carol's mouth dropped, and Sharon said, "And you should do it with John." And John, who was also married, stood up, and he was so excited that he nearly fell down. He was so excited to hear that he was being chosen to sleep with Carol. And Sharon continued, she said, "You need to get laid. You should go with John right now after class. Go to a drugstore, buy oils, buy some condoms, and get a hotel and have sex all night."
And did they?
Yes.
Jesus. And what happened to the marriages?
I think John's continued. I think Carol's ended. And I think that was a one-night stand because that didn't happen again. But I witnessed other similar circumstances.
Well, you were in an arranged marriage yourself.
Yes.
You were told who to marry, and you did.
Well, it wasn't like you should marry her or you have to marry her. It was more like this atmosphere of coercion like this woman Carol faced. And I felt that, on reflection, I realized that her having sex with this guy was non-consensual because she was brainwashed and I was brainwashed.
Right, and I think that's the key, is that it doesn't have to be, you need to do this. Because she's already primed you for.
Correct.
You're open to that kind of quote unquote suggestion more so than I or anybody else would be who wasn't in a cult, right?
Correct.
So it can be a little more subtle.
Correct. It was, and it was like, here, you ought to consider marrying Beth, and she's great, and you'd be so happy with her, and I liked her. I thought she was a nice woman and moderately attractive to me, and with this kind of suggestion, it was more like a command. I took it like a command, and that would be good for me, and that began a 13-year marriage.
And she also, Sharon, she tried to convince you were gay, right?
Oh yes, she did. She took advantage of a episode in my life where I told her about having been molested when I was 14. And she's about the worst person to get any advice from, Sharon. She was, she would use it and twist it around. And I was 14 when I was molested by a 20-year-old camp counselor. And when I brought it up to Sharon, I told her that it was something that always weighed on me, and I always felt that this was my fault and that I must be gay if I had done something like that. And mind you, I have no attraction to men, never did, but this one event made me think, well, maybe I am. And I always had this feeling throughout my, most of my life. And so when I told Sharon this, she said, well, it's not unusual for boys to experiment, and it's absolutely not unusual for a boy to experiment with an older man. And she actually talked about Plato and having,
Plato.
Plato. Yeah. Who, was known for exactly. Who was known.
I don't know. I mean, she's nuts, so I don't know what she could have been referring to. Hey, Spencer, you want some Play-Doh? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so she made it sound like this was a normal thing. Don't worry about it. But instead of saying you were molested, no, you're not gay or anything like that, she turned it into some other crazy thing.
She weaponized it. That was part of her ability. You told me that they break you down, right? And then when you're broken, they help you build yourself back up. In a way, you could have done it anyway on your own, right? But the key is that they convince you. This is where what I took away from your story when you told me is that the real key is that she made you believe that the only reason you're built back up and are successful and thriving is because of the cult, because of her, because of school. And that's what keeps you, because you're afraid if you leave, it crumbles again. So it's just total mind control from what I gleaned from you. And that's just horrifying to literally break a human. So the part about being gay, like it just was so insensitive and so evil to sort of weaponize that against you, to make you live with more self-doubt and, more trauma, so that was her it's just really messed up shit. In your book, you also talk about the retreat out in Montana. This is where in the book I started to get really angry, because I'm reading this and like you're describing like getting up at 5 a.m. All these people were flown out from like yuppie. Like again, to the audience, I want to say Spencer is the kind of lawyer that you should hire if you want to just rip someone's insides out. He is the last person on earth that I would ever have thought would be flown out to Montana to do free labor, building someone's deck, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. The description of like the stripping of the wood, I got so anxious just because it was such like finite precision work that you guys didn't have experience doing. And she would get angry if you didn't do it right, and you'd have to do it over again, and you didn't get to eat until God knows what. Like, was that just like the craziest part for you? Like, because it sounds like from the book that that's when you started to realize, like, wait a second, this is crazy.
It's funny that you say that, because it was actually something I loved going out to Montana. I really did. And it was at that first day where I was stripping the wood, I was very unhappy, and I really thought enough was enough. And later on that night, if you recall, there was a meeting with Sharon, and I told her that, part of me wanted to leave, and I was thinking, why don't they hire somebody to do this, and why the fuck am I doing this, and blah, 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 blah. And she said, she laughed. She thought that was funny, and everybody else laughed. And the conversation turned into, well, that part of yourself that thinks you're better than this is vanity and false pride, and you need to be more humble. And by coming here on retreat, you're going to learn about humility, about service, about helping me, Sharon, because I'm your teacher. And this will in turn help you and give you a tool to help navigate your life. And so she flipped it all around. I mean, she fucking flipped it around. So I used to look forward every summer for a couple of decades going out there and working in very dangerous circumstances. I definitely don't think you'd have stayed on this cult. I really can't see you staying very long.
No, it would have been something like strip wood, 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm out of here. That would have been it. I don't even think I would have made it on the plane. But you said before, you were unhappy, you were at a low point in your life, and that's what they do. So what was the point where you said, I got to get out of here?
Well, this was, it really happened 12 years in. A lot of my friends who were in the group wanted to leave because Sharon really lost her shit on one of these retreats, and was even more abusive than she'd ever been. And a whole group of us were going to leave. But as it turned out, my then wife, who's now my ex-wife, she wanted to stay. And I realized, if I left, the marriage would end. And although I just didn't want to lose my marriage at that point, I wasn't unhappy in it. And so I was stuck. So really, it wasn't until many years later, really 2 years before I left, that the cracks of my involvement started. And it started when Sharon got really meddled in my divorce and tried to, have my child taken from me. and she got involved in my business in a way that was, putting me at risk with my law license. And that was pretty much the end. And I guess, the thing that I wanted to say to you is it was a feeling of betrayal. I realized these people were not in my corner, and once you realize that, it's kind of easy to leave.
Do you look back on it now and sometimes say to yourself, how the hell was I in a cult for 23 years? 23 years is a long time to go through the full gamut of everything you went through until you realize it's time to get out. Or for you, it just was what it was, right? And that cult is still going on, right?
Oh, yeah, they're going on. They are meeting. They have probably about 100 or 200 people, and it's still, they're much more undercover now than they were in my day. But
what do you think the book is going to do to that? How will it impact the existence still of this cult? Is your hope that it helps bring it down?
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. I think the more people who read it, the more it's in the news, and it has been in the Post, and the Post is doing another article this weekend actually about it. And the more publicity that I do, the more word gets out. And I've already had people who are in the cult call me and say, "Hey, wait a second, I think I'm in that group." That Sharon is dead, and people don't use their names, and they're very good at cloaking who they are. So I do think it's going to make a difference, and I hope to close it.
Well, I hope you're right, and I thank you for sharing your story. I think it's important that people hear it. It's a truly incredible story, because most people, I think, when they think of cults, they think of like hippy dippy freaks, and there's some guy with a headband who's like giving them LSD. It's like that's most of, I think The Vow helped change that,
right,
bring it into the urban sphere with, more elite type people, educated people, successful people. But it's still not something you think about when you think about a cult. You don't think about a guy like Spencer Schneider in the middle of Manhattan being dominated in his marriage, in his career, in every aspect of his. She cut you off from your friends and your family. We didn't get into that, but there was years where you just weren't in contact with friends and family. So, Manhattan Cult Story. It's, quote, my unbelievable true story of sex, crimes, chaos, and survival. Again, it's on Amazon and bookstores everywhere. It's riveting. You're going to read this book, and you're not going to believe that shit like this goes down. So, Spencer, thanks again for doing this, and good luck with the book, man.
Thank you so much, Andy.
All righty. Take care.
Happy to be here.
What an incredible story. I mean, every time I think about what Spencer's been through and how he's come out the other side relatively sane like all of us and thriving in his life and his career, and it just I don't really understand personally the whole cult phenomenon. I'm just a strong-willed person. I'm opinionated. I am a skeptic. I do believe that there's a lot of people out there out to screw you, and so my antenna goes way up. And so I'm always interested to understand how people, whether it's Spencer or people from Jonestown that literally end up going, sure, I'll drink the cyanide and die. Like, what gets you to that place? But like I was saying earlier, in a way, we see that in politics. We see that in our country today with Trumpism and the cult of personality of Trump. And Trump is a cult leader, and he's convinced tens of millions of people that no matter what bad shit happens to them and this country, it's all better for him, and that they should love that. And guess what? They do. Anyway, it's time to go to our next guest. She is Jill Schlesinger, CBS News business analyst and host of Jill on Money. Welcome into the back room, Jill.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
So let's get right into something that concerns me personally as an American. You have inflation at record levels. Job growth is now slowing. The stock market has been on a roller coaster. There's all this talk of recession. If you spend any amount of time watching TV or listening to the radio or reading a newspaper, there's a lot of economists and certainly Republicans that are acting as if the sky is falling. So, is the sky falling?
Well, I'm not allowed to say that the sky is falling, but nor am I allowed to say don't panic, because my Jewish mother in Westchester has basically said I can never say don't panic because she always feels panicky when I say that. You know what? Look, it's not a great time for the economy in this moment, and we're at a real transition point. And I think it's worth saying that, like, nobody wants a recession, but a recession is becoming more and more likely. And a recession is probably, again, there is human suffering to it, but it is a normal part of an economic cycle. So it's not something so much to be feared as it's something to prepare for, to understand that, hey, this could happen. And frankly, even if we don't have what is classically termed a recession by the National Bureau of Economic Research, we are having a slowdown. And
by the way, that would be defined as 2 quarters in a row.
So
or is that a misconception?
That's somewhat of a misconception. It's sort of, that's like the shorthand, but there's actually a body, an economic body called the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER, and they've got a part of the organization called, you ready for this? The Dating Committee. And they swipe left or right to find out whether there's a recession. I'm just kidding. But what they do is they look at a number of different factors. They weigh those factors, and then they are the ones who declare whether or not a recession has occurred. So, I know a lot of people will say 2 negative quarters in a row, but if you look back to the spring of 2020, we had a recession in the beginning of COVID, right? March, basically the 3rd week of February till the end of March. Mm-hmm. That was only 2 months. That wasn't even one whole quarter. And it was a recession, all right. I mean, the economy cratered, and we were in a recession for a very short and deep period. But it wasn't 2 consecutive quarters. But the National Bureau of Economic Research came out in the aftermath and said, here is the beginning, here is the end. So, sometimes recessions can be very short and intense and deep, like the COVID recession. And sometimes you can have shallow recessions, mm-hmm. and sometimes you can have like the worst combination, which was the recession that followed the financial crisis, which was deep and long. And I don't think that we're going to get either of those 2 recent ones. What it looks like is we're getting a Federal Reserve very interested in slowing down the economy. It is hard for the Federal Reserve to make this right. They're not going to exactly get it right. If they do, it would be a high probability. So we're going to get a slowdown. And for some people, it's going to feel awful, like a very awful recession. And for other people, it's not going to be so bad. Mm-hmm. But there's going to be a slowdown, if not a recession, in, let's call it, the next 18 months.
So I'm going to ask you a question. It's been many years since I served as a member of the Federal Reserve, so I'm a little hazy on my factoids. But just what you're describing sounds so arbitrary. So, for example, if there were 2 negative quarters of GDP, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a scenario where the board that you mentioned can say, nope, but we're not in a recession? And like the media and politicians wouldn't pounce all over that?
Well, it's unlikely, right? Because normally if you have a contraction that is lasting for 6 months, chances are they're going to come back and say that was a recession. Mm-hmm. But it might be kind of intriguing to you to understand that there are times where the NBER will sort of err on the other side. They'll say, like, the recession started at this point. So, for example, I think many people would be surprised to learn that the Great Recession, which we kind of think about as like, oh, that was the financial crisis was 2008, and 2009 things got really awful, and things kind of bottomed out in 2010. According to NBER, the recession started in December of 2007. And so often what they're doing is, and if you go on their website, it is kind of cool because they don't really it's kind of like, it's like the formula or the recipe for Coca-Cola. They don't release the exact metrics, but you get the sense that they do a lot of weight. They give a lot of weight towards the labor market, and they give a lot of weight towards output in terms of the economy and exports. And so, all that being said, it's not quite as arbitrary. It's almost like 2 negative quarters would probably be a recession. Chances are they would make it a longer period of time. But look, what do we know? We know that the global economy was frozen on purpose because of COVID. The governments of the advanced economies of the world sent people home, gave them money, said, do not go out, do not spend money, and let's get a hold of this thing. And that was a very specific and some course of action that had not been taken ever. And as we came out of that period, the economy had starts and stops and starts and stops. And what we now know in retrospect is that I think politicians, as well as the Federal Reserve Board and other central banks, did the best they could in real time. They now, in retrospect, probably made some decisions that weren't ideal, but they did do the best they could. And now we are grappling with, 4-decade high in inflation. The Fed's got to raise rates. We can't take the money back from various stimulus plans that wasn't probably spent in the best way, the most efficient way. And we are where we are. So the Fed is raising rates, and all the advanced economies are going to start raising rates, and they are going to slow things down. There's no doubt about it. It's already starting to happen. And when the Fed is chasing inflation once it's already gone up, the chance of a recession becomes very high because basically the idea of raising interest rates is a very blunt tool. There's no nuance to it. And so they'll often overshoot. And that's where the risk lies right now.
And so the issue of interest rates and also combine that with inflation and the things that are hitting the average American the hardest, the middle class, the working class, let's say. We were basically at zero rates for so many years. I mean, is it just that we got so used to interest rates being nothing that 4 and 5%, which historically is not bad at all of a sudden that's the sky is falling rhetoric, fueling that rhetoric?
Well, it's not as much like there's just some very strange things that can happen in an economy that is advanced, like the U.S. economy. And I mean, let me just do a name drop, and it's not one of your Hollywood name drops, Andy. I was in the green room at CBS this morning a few years back. This is well before the COVID era, and I'm such a goof and such a nerd that when Ben Bernanke was in the House, I was the only one on the entire staff who was excited. And I was excited, believe me. And I went up to him and I pulled him aside and I said, let's leave this room. It's mic'd. I want to ask you some questions. And he's like, no, that's okay. I'll talk to you. It doesn't matter. On the record, off the record, it's fine. And I said, I don't really understand why the economy can't grow is maybe probably 15, 16. He goes, it's going to grow. He goes, it's just not going to grow by as much as you want because we have an aging population. And we are in an advanced economy where as the baby boomers start to retire, that is deflationary. And that's the critical issue that is hanging over the economy. And the issue around that, as I think about it today, is not so much that rates were low for too long, which they were, but that we have a demographic issue that is a problem in our labor force, in our economy, which would, frankly, by a lot of economists, we're not talking about politics, economists really believe would be alleviated by a much more expansive immigration policy. Let's just get a bunch of people in here. Let's get them in the U.S. Let's get them working. And that will create a nice churn in the economy. And we had this very strange situation where not only did we freeze the economy and we dropped interest rates down to zero, but we also were at a time where no one was coming into the country, and our labor force just shrank. And it is very difficult to grow an economy without a little extra help, meaning fiscal and monetary stimulus, if you don't have people.
Right.
And that's where we are right now. And
What-
so it's not so much that it's like artificially low, like artificial, like that's what monetary policy is. It's an artificial injection or removal of funds from the economy to either juice it up or slow it down.
What do you say to the people who say it feels like, I always remember, John Edwards and his Two Americas, right? And you hear so many people today say the economy feels differently depending upon which group you're in. If you're in the upper classes, you don't really think about or talk about recession too much. If you are in the lower and middle classes, and every gas tank fill up is critical in your life, and buying milk that's 30% more expensive than last year, you're living in a different economy. And just me personally, it does feel that way. It feels like Americans are not experiencing the pain equally.
Well, I mean, the thing about inflation and why it is so pernicious is that it is disproportionately hard on people who make less than the median household income. And it makes sense, right? Because if I make 65 grand a year in my household, what are my three huge expenses? One, where I live, either renting or a house or owning a house. Two, food. Three, energy. And so a bigger share of my total income goes to those three things, which means I really take it on the chin when it comes to inflation. Now, if you make $300,000 a year, the weird part about inflation is that even though a smaller share of your total is going to those items, you completely lose your mind because you're like, Jesus Christ, it takes so much money to fill up my Range Rover. And so what happens is the strange part about inflation is that it's not that it doesn't affect everybody. It impacts everyone. It disproportionately hurts people at the medium to lower end, and the people at the upper end are feeling it and just complain about it. And that's what breeds so much negativity. So as I sit here and talk to you today in the beginning of July, the most interesting factoid that and you know me, I love my factoids.
Who doesn't love a good factoid?
I mean,
Just the word
it's like
factoid is great.
Charts and factoids. I love it. And the factoid that I think is fascinating is the University of Michigan has a consumer sentiment index. They take a reading twice every month. In June, the University of Michigan sentiment index fell to an all-time low. Do you know how long this has been in effect? It's 50 freaking years. So if you think about all of the shit that has happened in the last 50 years, and this is the absolute worst I've felt.
But you see, that's my point. It's like, what do you say to the idiots like me who go, well, Jill, you walk around Manhattan and the restaurants are full, the bars are full, the movies, Broadway, shows, concerts, the travel industry is experiencing record revenue. Like, what do you say to people who look around and go like, it doesn't, like, to your point, it now is the worst. This doesn't feel so bad.
I know so that's the thing that's so crazy. But that's also why inflation is so dangerous, because whatever level you're at, you feel it in some way, and it becomes this exaggerated presence in your life. I can think of in the last 20 years, times that I've been much more fearful about what's going on in the economy than where we are today. Now, here's one little bit of good news that might make you feel better about this, and that is that inflation is going to come down. There's no doubt about it. The question is, the wage gains that we've seen let's say the lower third of Americans have been pretty robust. I mean, you notice that we're not talking about even though it's so silly that we don't have a federal minimum wage that's moved, essentially Amazon moved the minimum wage, right, on its own. And if you look at a lot of the people who work in leisure and hospitality, in warehousing, those jobs are paying a lot more money. So conceivably, I'm not saying this will happen, but conceivably, one might paint a picture where there could be some pain across the economy, but as inflation comes down, are those big firms going to slash wages? I doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the hope among economists is, hey, what would be kind of cool is if we had a shallow recession where the class of people that own stocks takes it on the chin, and where bonuses are down on Wall Street, and where software engineers who have, a year of college don't make $200,000 for dropping out,
Mm-hmm.
that those people take it on the chin, and that those at the bottom actually retain their wage gains. And so as prices come down, it could be that we see that there's progress made.
Right.
I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that's kind of like a generalized hope.
Right, because real wages are up, what, like 5-6%, right?
Well, wages are up about 5%, but if
and
prices
inflation
are up
is 8%.
Yeah, 8.5%.
So
then you see that you're screwed, right? You're behind.
Right.
But there are many jobs at the lower end where wages are up more. Like if you look at 2 years and you look at wages, wages are up quite a bit for the lower third of earners. And, the biggest problem that I have in general is that nobody really likes to label the good guy, the bad guy, the good actor, the bad actor. I think that generally speaking, when I talk to the smartest economists that I know, what they say is the Fed screwed it up. They waited too long to raise rates. But you know what? They're human beings. Jerome Powell is subject to the same recency bias that you and I are subject to, meaning that whatever has happened most recently shapes the way we behave right now. So if you look at all the Fed officials who came of age with no inflation, they never experienced inflation as Fed officials, and what are they shaped by? They're shaped by the Great Recession. The big knock on the Fed during the Great Recession was that Bernanke and Yellen were too quick to raise interest rates, and that really hurt people at the lower end of the earnings scale. And they did not want to repeat that. They wanted to make sure that people were taken care of. And the big mistake that was made among all lawmakers in the Great Recession and the financial crisis is they did not provide real people who were losing their homes with help. They did a great job of pulling Wall Street out of the doldrums, back from the precipice. They didn't help real people. So they overdid it and helped real people almost too much. And there was too many dollars facing too few goods. And the Fed did not recognize that it had passed the point where it needed to do something until it was too late. And when Biden got into office, he had promised another stimulus, and it was already unnecessary at that point.
Right.
So you put it all together and throw a war on top of it, and you have an inflationary cocktail that is very difficult to shove down your throat.
Right. In your opinion, is recession priced into the stock market right now?
I don't know. I mean, the stock market is so, full of a bunch of dum-dums who think they know better, right? So retail investors have not panicked. They're not pulling money out of the market. Institutions are very twitchy right now, but that's because they made so much money on the way up. So, it stands to reason, I think, that the stocks that did the best during the pandemic came back down to earth. There's a real concern that mergers and acquisition activity is going to slow down, that corporate finance is going to be hurt. But, big companies are in fine shape.
Right.
U.S. balance sheets are actually not in terrible shape.
Yeah, no, earnings seasons have been great. I mean, relatively speaking. So,
I mean, it doesn't mean it can't change, and bad things can happen. And I mean, the best thing about risky assets that are going down in value and have gone down in value is that your moronic friend who always said to you, "Oh my God, you're such an idiot for not owning crypto," you don't have to listen to that anymore. So that's the good news.
I'm glad you just.
That it hurts.
I'm glad you just said that. I want to go to a clip right now. Go ahead, Maddie, put that on.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, expensive, digital images of monkeys are going to improve the world immensely.
We all agree on that.
And, that's so incredible. Anyway, I'm used to asset classes where, like a farm, where they have output, or a company where they make products. To have an asset class that's 100% based on sort of greater fool theory that somebody's going to pay more for it than I do, and where it has at its heart sort of this anonymity that, you avoid taxation or any sort of, government rules about kidnapping fees or things.
Yeah.
So that was Bill Gates basically saying if you invest in crypto and NFTs, you're an idiot. I mean, are you a fan, or do you share Gates' opinion on this kind of activity?
Well, first of all, I will not invite those crypto bros attacking me. I have enough anti-Semitic, homophobic crap in my feed that I don't need that, okay?
Well, you always have room for like one or two angry crypto bros,
I know.
You gotta love the crypto bros.
Can I just tell you something funny, though? I remember when the whole GameStop fiasco was going on, and I went on a podcast with my friend Jeff, who's a much younger guy, and I love him to death, and I was trying to explain things. And the worst insult that I got was someone said, "This lady."
Yeah.
I was like, lady?
By the way, for the audience,
about?
I can assure you, Jill Schlesinger is no lady.
Yeah, no lady. Look, I don't. I have had people explain to me why this is the most amazing thing in the world. This thing called the blockchain, and I guess that, like, as a thought experiment, as someone who is a little bit of a math head, okay, I can indulge it. I still really don't get the use case. I really don't. And this comes from, like, my first crypto story for CBS was in, I think it was 2010, when Bitcoin went above 1,000. It went from like $13 to 1,000. And I was asked to do something about that, talk about that. And, at that time I was like, well, it's like used for some bad stuff, and I don't know a lot about it. And I got hammered. And then, by the crypto bros. And then, look, I've been watching it. I am fascinated to watch manias in general. At my first job on Wall Street, I was a commodities trader. So it looked like a plain old commodities, like, charge in euphoric, let's buy the tulips, let's buy anything. I don't think that anyone has actually convinced me that there is an amazing case for decentralized finance. I mean, I, as you know, Andy, I'm a product of, sort of a Wall Street family. Mm-hmm. And, I like to consider the industry like my drunk uncle that I love very much, but I get embarrassed when that uncle behaves badly. And I like centralization. I mean, I sort of giggle every time there's some sort of mayhem with crypto where people are like, well, it was just a scam, and who's going to help me with this? Well, you wanted decentralization. Mm-hmm. Go for it. You lost your fob, too bad. And so the idea that some of these organizations were able to raise money hand over fist, as if we should, like, say, oh, those private equity people are so smart. Maybe they are. I just don't see it. So I've never owned crypto. I have friends who've made money doing it. I know some really smart people who threw a few bucks at it, like, as if it were like, well, let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. So I don't know people who are really, deep into it. As you know, my girlfriend works at a major Wall Street firm. And, when I ask her about, like, her colleagues and who owns it, like, nobody owns it.
Right.
We all sort of are waiting. It's almost like you're watching the ocean churn up and you see these massive waves in there. And you're like, maybe when it calms down, I'll go in the water. But right now, maybe not. Maybe.
The key word is maybe. I mean, I personally, I don't get it. I don't want to get it. If years ago, if someone would say bandwidth, I wanted to slap them. Now, if someone says to me blockchain, I want to slap them. Like, I just have I don't like crypto bros. I don't like anything crypto related because I personally think it's a scam. But we'll see.
I mean, and you know what? And it could be, and it could also be like we don't actually see what ends up being the case for it. That's the other piece of it. Like, I'm willing to say, like, I don't know. Maybe it's going to be something. I'll wait, and I'll be a late adopter. I'm a late adopter of many things,
including dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Late adopter of sexuality. I had to get married to a man and then a woman. I had
Didn't
to
we
wait
all?
for. I mean, really unbelievable.
So before I let you go, I got one last thing I want to ask you about. I want to shift to the political landscape really quickly, because we've been talking a lot about the economy, recession, inflation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How much of that do you think this particular year, when you think about, what James Carville once said is the economy's stupid, and there's a cult of Carville fans who believe it's always going to be the economy stupid. But is the economy, with everything else that's going on right now, Roe v. Wade, mass shootings every other day, is it still, do you think it's still going to be the economy stupid? And if so, should that really keep Democrats up at night for November?
I'm afraid to tell you that this inflation issue is really intense and it's not going away. And it should should it keep people up? Like, what keeps me up is I don't want to get COVID. I'm trying to figure out how to have lunch with my friend Andy. I hope my family is safe. Those are the things that keep me up. I've never been kept up by the economy or politics, except when I think democracy is dying, which may be happening. Unfortunately, right now,
that would actually be what I was referring to about being kept up at night if you're a Democrat.
Yeah, I think that you should. I think it is. Coming out of the closet as an Upper West Side lesbian Jewess, I think there are many things that keep me up at night. None of them are economics related. Many of them are about fairness and faith that you're working, even if you don't believe the exact same thing, that you're working towards the same ultimate goal. And so that's what is upsetting. The economy is going to cause many of the switching from one party to another party to another party to another party. That's going to happen anyway. And you know how I feel about this, Andy. It's just very few parties or presidents should get as much credit for a good economy and as blame for a bad economy. So I mean, it is horrifying for me to imagine that there's going to be an even stronger move rightward because of the economy, but I do think that that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to end on this note. I'm going to say that what I suspect what keeps you up at night as an Upper West Side lesbian Jewess is the eventual closing of Zabar's. Am I wrong?
Are you
Am I wrong?
saying that that's going to happen?
No, I'm just saying that.
You say, could that happen? I mean, it could happen. There's no doubt. You know what? Look, I mean, the hard. I'm just back. I was traveling overseas, and there was, I must say, a blissful moment of saying, I don't want to think about this. And I am very immersed in a news cycle because of the world I'm in. But it was kind of great to be doing something else, clear your head, come back and say, you know what? I got to do something now. Now I got to get busy. I have things to do. I was listening to Ezra Klein's podcast. I think it was Ezra Klein's podcast. And he was talking to somebody about Roe and the overturning and where the Supreme Court has gone. And there was a book that was recommended, which I actually read on the airplane coming back. And it's by Rebecca Solnit, and it's called Hope in the Dark. And it was written at a very different time. It was written in 2003-04. And I think that one thing that became clear to me in just kind of reading this is that hope is not like I'm putting my head into the sand and I hope that everything goes okay. Hope is I'm going to use this ability and this energy that I'm feeling right now to do something more meaningful, to advance even in the smallest of ways. And so if you feel like, I'm hopeless, then you sit at home, you suck your thumb, you do nothing. But hope should hope should catalyze you into doing something. So if you are feeling hopeless about the economy, then go out and do something that is going to help somebody else. And if you are feeling hopeless about where we are in the fight for, equality with women, then go support women candidates. Like, for me, doing something feels so much better than waiting for something to be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good attitude to have. And we're going to leave on that note, except we're going to leave on one other last note. I want to know when Jill Schlesinger is not predicting economic gloom and doom or spreading euphoric positivity in the economy, what does Jill do for fun? 30 seconds.
Okay, Jill goes out with her friend Andy for lunch next week, right? We have a date.
We do.
Did you want to also disclose the fact that, you know me and that we're friends and that, you're going to do that, right?
I'm going to do it right now. I just wasn't sure that would be okay with you, but Jill and I know each other a very long time. I know Jill when she was just like a marketing assistant at a catalog company.
Yeah,
and
when I was waiting around to get married
or
divorced or whatever I was.
Watching you go from, the Ross Simons catalog to doing some financial planning in Rhode Island to some local spots on the radio to Fox News and then CBS and then eating my cereal and watching you on CBS Sunday Morning and all that good stuff. It's truly incredible how you have over the years reinvented yourself. You should also know, guys, that Jill was one of the few people when I got married once by an Elvis impersonator in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Jill was there.
We
do go back a long way.
Wait a second. Andy, I was at 2 of your 3 weddings. I'm sad that I had to not
I knew you were going to go there.
I mean, it's sad.
Hey, look, you know what? Right. I believe in if you go through your whole life with this, if you fall off the bike, get back on and keep riding bullshit. Well, what better to do that with than marriage, right?
Well, I mean, I think both you and I believe very much in the institution, perhaps overly
We
so.
believe in it so much that we just keep doing it.
We keep doing it.
Yeah.
So here's what I do for fun.
We're keeping the wedding business in business.
Exactly. What I'm a big reader. I like, binging on my television. I'm very close to my family. I'm very into deep relationships. So I don't have a lot of them, but I hate superficial relationships, even though I'm very good at those, but I like depth, which is why, gentle listeners, why Andy and I fell in love in 1991. Is that right, Andy?
Yeah, and I've been trying to flip you basically for 30 years to no success.
So it's such a lie.
Still a lesbian.
Evidently, you keep putting that out there, but that's a big lie. But I adore you. So I like very interesting, dark, and funny people. And you are one of them. And you are somebody who has reinvented yourself as well. And I adore you, and I wish you the best of luck with your brand new show, which has a funny name, just in case anyone wanted to know why I'm such a bad person. I just wanted to get that in there.
Well, I suspect I know why you're making that reference, but I'm not going to go there. So we'll leave on that note. Jill Schlesinger, financial guru, CBS business analyst. No, what did you tell me? CBS News business
Jill
analyst
Schlesinger.
and host of Jill on Money.
FYI, this is one of the funniest things that happens to me because, I'll say, this is it. This is the only thing that you do get right, as opposed to every other anchor that I've ever worked with, is that you know how to pronounce my name, which I think is Schles rhymes with less. Schlesinger, CBS News business analyst, host of Jill on Money, and Andy's pal.
Exactly. And I'm damn glad you are. See you soon. See you next week.
Well, love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye. So there you have it. Episode 4 in the can. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So leave us a message at 845-307-7446 or shoot us an email at backroomandy@gmail.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Andy Ostroy. At this point, I want to thank you, Maddie Rosenberg, engineer and producer extraordinaire. Cricket Lengyel for our logo graphic design, Andy Hollander for our kick-ass music, and a big thank you again to our awesome guests, Spencer Schneider and Jill Schlesinger. So keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and in your own backyards. And we hope you'll join us again next week. Have a great week.